So our first speaker is Frank Fabbro. Frank grew up birding around the Twin Cities before moving out west to pursue his bachelor's degree in wildlife biology and landscape restoration at the University of California, Davis. Since then, he has traveled across the country to survey breeding and migrating birds from Alaska to Michigan and has worked with a variety of species, from greater prairie chickens to great gray owls. Throughout these travels, one of the groups of birds has consistently captured his interest, and he's excited to share more about them today. And as a personal shout out, when Frank's in town, he stops by Carpenter Nature Center's banding station to share his expertise with our new banding trainees, which is just an awesome full circle moment because we all remember when Frank was the new guy himself. So Frank, thanks for getting up early when you're scheduled on the night shift monitoring owls out there in California. And we'll let you take it away and share your screen.
Great. Thanks, Jen. Let me get this pulled up here. Let's see. Looks like I don't have permission to share yet.
I think we got you there. Sorry.
All good.
Should be good now.
Great. Can everyone see that all right?
Just loading. There you go. You're all good.
Great. Well, thanks, Jen. Thanks everybody for being here. I'm excited to kick off the primer with this great group of birds, and I think a largely underappreciated group of birds. So, yeah, I'm gonna dive right in. When I was first kind of building this presentation, I was realizing that 20 minutes wasn't quite enough time to talk about all of Minnesota's gull species in full depth. So I'm going to instead kind of do a broad strokes taxonomic overview of all the gull species to start, and then I'll talk a little bit about why gulls are so great, in my opinion, and I hopefully will be able to convince some of the gull skeptics in the room that they're worth another look, despite their challenging reputation. And then I'll talk a little bit about, time permitting, I'll talk about where, when, and what to look for in some of these Minnesota gulls. All right, so when we talk about gulls, we're talking about the family Laridae, which includes gulls, terns, and skimmers. The bulk of the gull diversity in Minnesota is in this genus here, genus Larus, which are the large white-headed gulls. There are 11 species on the Minnesota state list, and two particularly widespread and ubiquitous ones, the ring-billed gull and the herring gull, the American herring gull. And then we have a suite of other gulls here that kind of come and join us in the winter months, coming down from the high Arctic. And then there's some rarely occurring species here that have just a couple of records. All right. And then we also have the genus Leucophaeus, which is the Franklin's gull, and on rare occasions the laughing gull. Compared to Laris, you'll see that these are one of the hooded gulls. So on the bottom left, this breeding plumage gull has got a completely black head. It's got these white eye arcs. And then they also have this kind of pink rosy wash on the chest in the breeding plumage. In the non-breeding plumage, the Franklin's gull has got this kind of dusky wash around the neck and the collar. I think everyone can see my cursor here, but if not, speak up, I guess. I'm going to be pointing at some of these features here throughout the presentation. Yeah, the Franklin's gull is a fantastic species. It's one of these long distance migrants that kind of is an obligate breeder in the prairie potholes. So we have them breeding in Minnesota a little bit, but especially in the Dakotas and Canada. And then they migrate all the way down to the coast of Chile and Peru in the winter, and just they totally shift their ecology in the winter, eating kind of invertebrates and marine systems as opposed to the kind of way you'll see them at agricultural fields and catching insects on the wing here in the summer. So very different in the different times of year. These are one of the species, maybe the only species that has actually been recorded on all 7 continents as well. They're wide ranging despite breeding only in the prairie potholes. So very cool gull that we're lucky to have. That's in contrast to this other species here, another hooded gull, the Bonaparte's gull. Um, Superficially kind of similar to the Franklin's gull with this black hood, but the Bonaparte's gull is kind of much more tern-like in appearance. When you see them flying around, you're more likely to confuse it with something like a forester's tern. They're very kind of silvery whitish gray on the back, and they have this distinctive white leading edge to the wing. These primaries here, this white wedge. Um, what else? The non-breeding plumage, they've got this small black spot behind the eye, as opposed to the Franklin's gull that had this kind of dark shading behind the eye. The back of the Franklin's gull here is a different color of gray too. You see how slate gray that is, as opposed to the whitish gray of these Bonaparte skulls. Great. So those are the three kind of main genera of commonly occurring gulls. We have this suite of other rarely occurring gulls in the state as well. These are the ones that people tend to get pretty excited about when they show up. A lot of them are in their own genera, very distinctive looking. But yeah, these are the big three. Um, okay, kind of shifting on to talk a little bit about some of the reason that gulls are so great. They're super widespread and adaptive. So this is the map of the distribution of the family Laridae throughout the world. You'll see there's a gull for pretty much every continent and every ocean. They occupy all these different niches, which I was talking about with the Franklin's gull, kind of moving between the prairie potholes and these estuaries in South America. But they undergo massive long distance migrations, which I think a lot of birders really like birds because of these long distance migrations, and this is a great time of year to get to enjoy those. Yeah, and they occupy all sorts of different habitats. They're in the lower 48. We often see them in landfills and parking lots, which definitely gives them maybe a bad rap, but you can also see them off the continental shelf, 30, 40 miles off land. You can see them up in the pristine tundra and the taiga forests. They breed up in conifers. They are in deep inland lakes, wetlands. You can see them in prairies, super far from water sometimes, and beaches and estuaries and mudflats. So yeah, they're all over the place, which is really always a goal no matter where you are, which I think is kind of neat. All right, they are also a frontier in ornithology, is what I'm calling it. What I mean by that is just the family of Laridae and gulls are relatively understudied in bird science. There's a lot of work to still be done in learning about their ecology, about their migration, about their taxonomy. A couple instances of this in recent years. The herring gull complex was recently split by the AOS in 2025. What that means is the herring gull is now considered four different species. If you use eBird, you may have noticed that the herring gull is now the American herring gull because we have the other species here. The Vega gull is this kind of East Asian, Siberian nesting herring gull relative that has occurred in the Great Lakes and in Minnesota. So definitely something to keep an eye out for. Um, the Mew gull is another one that was recently split in 2021 into the short-billed gull and the common gull. And I included a little map here of short-billed gull sightings in the Midwest in the last month. You can see Minnesota is definitely lacking there. Definitely something to keep an eye out for in the next month or two as birds are moving through. And I think this is all super interesting because it's an area where we, as just recreational birders with great digital cameras and keen observation skills, can make a lot of contribution to our knowledge of some of these species. We're still learning how to identify some of these things. So, yeah, it's a great chance to get out in the field and get involved. All right. Visible molts. So I'm going to go down a bit of a rabbit hole here with molts, but I think it's something that makes gulls super interesting. They're one of these species that take multiple years to reach adult plumage, much in the same way that something like a bald eagle takes multiple years to reach that adult plumage with its white head and white tail. Um, and I think molt can teach us a lot about bird ecology, but I also think it's super important with gulls because the field marks you're using to identify a first cycle gull might be different than the field marks you're using to identify an adult gull. So I know there's a lot going on this slide here, and I'm going to talk about each of these photos in greater detail in the coming slides. But just to give you kind of the broad overview here, some gulls, the larger gulls, particularly herring gulls, Iceland gulls, glaucus gulls, they take 4 years to reach adult plumage. They're considered 4-year gulls, as opposed to some of these other gulls, like ring-billed gulls, are a little smaller, so they take 3 years to reach adult plumage. Some Bonaparte's gulls and other species take just 2 years. But that's what this slide is showing. These red arrows represent a molt. So most of these gulls undergo a complete molt in the late summer to early fall, where they drop every single feather on their body and regrow them. And at that point, they become the next cycle or the next plumage. So when you hear people talk about cycles, that's what they're talking about there. It's the set of feathers that a bird is wearing at any moment. Um, there are some other molts kind of thrown in between the annual cycle that I'm not going to talk about just for simplicity's sake. Um, but after those 4 years for herring gull per se, the adult plumage is retained. They don't go back at all. They just keep alternating between a breeding plumage and a non-breeding plumage. So let's talk a little bit more about all these different gulls. I'm going to use herring gull as kind of a good case study in molt, but the features I'm talking about a herring gull can be applied to lots of other species as well. So when a gull is hatched, it comes out in juvenile plumage, which for many species is this kind of sooty gray, really intricately patterned plumage that you see here on the left. Uh, as they go through their first few months of life, in the first fall and the first winter, some of these feathers will drop, but the birds will largely stay this kind of intricate sooty ground color. And you'll also see, notably on the herring gull, the base of the bill is starting to turn pink. This is an important field mark for separating herring gulls from, excuse me, from some other species. Yeah. Then we'll see on the second cycle bird here, there's more of these adult mantle feathers coming in. So this gray on the back is an indicator that you're no longer in the first cycle realm. Um, it's got these white contour feathers along the chest and head starting to come in as well. You can see some field marks on birds in flight that you can't see when they're standing or sitting on the water. So when you have the opportunity, it's helpful to see gulls in flight as well as standing or sitting. Um, this second cycle gull, you can see it's got this black tail band and a white rump. That's another great mark for a second cycle as opposed to this first cycle here that we were talking about. They have a much more barred kind of upper tail and tail band going on. Um, the eye is often pale on second cycle gulls. I think generally when you're talking about gulls, using plumage is a better feature than using bare parts like eyes, legs, and bills. Those have a little more variability, but it's always good to use multiple field marks when you're trying to identify these species. All right, moving on to third cycle. These can be very much adult-like in appearance, particularly when they're on the water here. It's a very gray back, but you'll see it's got some black here in the tertials and some of these other feathers that you wouldn't expect on an adult bird. You'll also notice the wingtips have some white spots, but it's very heavily reduced. On an adult bird, these are going to be gleaming white spots. The bill is also not quite that vibrant, kind of banana yellow color that you see on adult birds. And in flight, these black details are a lot more noticeable. These would all be gray here in the coverts. And this tail band is also very characteristic of subadult third cycle birds. The adults will have a fully white tail. All right, and then the adult plumage. So this bird on the right is what you'd be seeing if you went outside and saw some herring gulls today. These are breeding plumage condition, typically in March and April. Um, the head is very white as opposed to the kind of speckled head we see in the fall of the non-breeding birds. The bare part coloration on these adults in breeding condition too is really vibrant. So the bill, the legs, the skin around the eye, these can all become a lot more bright in color because of the hormonal changes happening in the birds. Um, but once a bird reaches adult plumage, it's just going to alternate back and forth between these two plumages for the rest of its life. It doesn't ever go back to those kind of brown speckled plumages. All right, I'm talking about ring-billed gulls. I know I'm throwing a lot of molt at you, but this is mostly to show that some of the things I'm talking about with herring gulls can be applied to lots of other species as well. So similarly in ring-billed gulls, they come out of the egg looking very kind of intricate and brown patterned, and just a month or two after they're out, they're going to start molting some of these back feathers into kind of plainer colors. You're going to see that base of the bill also turning pink like we saw in the herring gull. And then by the second cycle, because ring-billed gulls don't take as long to mature, they look very much adult-like, like we saw in the third cycle herring gulls. On the water, these could easily be mistaken for an adult, but you're going to see that there's no real white tips to the wings, which you would see on an adult. And in flight, again, it has these kind of black highlights in the coverts that you wouldn't expect on an adult bird. And it has this tail band here that you also would not expect to see on an adult. And here's the breeding plumage and the non-breeding plumage of ring-billed gull. Again, the very clean white head, which gives the genus Larus its name in the breeding plumage. And it also has these bare parts that are very vibrant in color compared to the non-breeding bird here that's very dusky streaking on the neck and nape. All right, moving on to when, where to look for Minnesota gulls. I kind of divide the gulling season up into three different periods. The late October to freeze up is kind of the period of highest gull diversity in Minnesota. In the Twin Cities, we often will lose all of our gulls in the dead of winter just because there's no open water. They might hang out on the Mississippi River or some of these areas, but up in Duluth, they'll have herring gulls and gulls all 365 days a year, which is another reason to love gulls. It's something to do in the winter when there's not a lot else around. And then right now we're kind of in this spring thaw migration period, which can be a really fun time to get out and look for gulls. They are in full breeding condition right now, so they're looking really good. And a lot of the birds that were wintering further south of us are starting to move back north. As some of these lakes start to melt out, you'll see the ones that have had lots of winter kills, so lots of fish that have kind of died over the winter. The gulls will congregate there. That can be a great spot to focus. And then there's the kind of summer post-breeding dispersal. This is the time of year when we have Franklin's gulls and occasionally laughing gulls in the state. This September to October period is when we tend to get Sabin's gulls moving through the state as well. So a little bit different than the rest of the year. This is a great time to go up to Duluth and see some of these species on their breeding colonies and kind of the whole mix of ages that come with that. Talking about where to look for gulls, roosting sites are often a really good spot. So in the fall and winter, gulls form these large flocks and tend to spend the night together somewhere they feel safe, often these large lakes. So Spring Lake in Scott County, Spring Lake in Dakota County on the Minnesota River, the city lakes. These are all spots that historically have been really good for gulling. It can be challenging to see them there because they might not come in till the very last light, and they might be quite distant, but that is a reliable place to see gulls. Landfills also are a spot to see gulls, not always the most scenic, but yeah, if you can find the loafing areas, what I mean by that is some of these areas near the landfill that gulls tend to sit where they feel safe and won't be disturbed. Those can be really good spots as the birds fly back and forth from a food source. So, kind of parking lots, building roofs, fields, lakes. These are all spots that you'll often see gulls congregating. In the summer, water treatment plants are also really good spots. A lot of insects, so often that's a good spot to look for Franklin's gulls and things. And then some of our larger lakes, Lake Superior, Lake Mille Lacs, gulls will congregate on the beaches and the docks and the piers. All right, this is just going to be a bit of a recap of what to look for in Minnesota gulls. So oftentimes the birds are really far away. You might not have enough details to put a name on every bird, and that's okay. But sometimes you can break it down from large groups down. So starting off, is it a hooded gull, like I was talking about? Does it have a black head? Is it small, tern like in Bonaparte's, or is it one of these larger white-headed gulls? Is it an adult? So looking at some of these features I was talking about, are there brown in the wing? Is the tail fully white? What do the bare parts look like? How big is it? So our main two gull species, herring gull and ring-billed gull, they can often mix together. The ring-billed gulls tend to leave us all during the winter. So if you're looking at the winter, it's probably a herring gull. But there are notable size differences. the bird in the foreground here is the herring gull, and you can see how much larger the head and the bill is to these ring-billed gulls in the background here with much more thin needle-like bills. Where do you see brown, white, gray, black on the gull? Those different shades of gray, different shades of black can all be very important features as well. So getting the bird in different lighting, getting different angles, these are all helpful things. And then also the bare part color. So some of the features I talked about already, and you can go as deep down into the wormhole here as you want. But the primaries are a good feature to look at. The rump and the tail band, the color of the back, the scapulars, the mantle, and these coverts here, are they brown and kind of young like, or are they gray and adult like? In flight, if you're getting good looks at these outer primaries, looking at where you see black, where you see gray, where you see white. This is a Iceland gull wing here, and you can see the inner web of this primary is grayish in color, and the outer web is black, and that's a good mark for Iceland gull. And so having a good digital camera and being able to capture these things in flight and kind of freeze them and study them later is definitely beneficial when you're gulling. Yeah, and some of the differences can be really subtle, like the difference here in the wingtips of the Iceland gull on top and the herring gull on the bottom. You can see the Iceland gull has got this kind of silvery color on the underside of the primary, as opposed to the herring gull with these jet black primaries. Or they can be really obvious too. You can see the difference in the gray between this lesser black-backed gull on the top and these ring-billed gulls on the bottom. Really striking difference in all sorts of lighting conditions. So I think I've hopefully not done too much diving into the gull nitty gritty. I'm going to leave with a couple more resources here. The Macaulay Library is a great resource if you're trying to find photos of gulls. They have photos they pull off of eBird, and they're all stored here. And so if you're trying to see what a ring-billed gull looks like in every month of the year, that's a spot you can do it. If you want, this gull guide here on the far right is a great resource. It's approachable, but also has incredible detail on all the different gull species. So that's a great book to get if you're looking into that. And I'll also give Clinton and Jessica a shout out. They hold these gulling field trips up in the Superior Entry in Duluth, and these are really good spots to get good looks at some of these gulls. And they do that with the Northeastern Minnesota Bird Alliance. So I think in November they'll probably put those up on the website there. And I think that's all I've got. Let me see
We
the
do have a
Q&A.
few questions, Frank, I can ask for you.
Yeah, if we got time, absolutely.
What is the evolutionary advantage to changing plumages over the first years?
It's a great question. I'm sort of speculating here, but you see it a lot in some of these larger birds. They take longer to reach maturity. I think some of these bigger feathers take more energy to grow in, and so I think it's just a life history strategy that a lot of these birds and other animals too you'll see follow. It's a evolutionary strategy where the longer lived, larger birds versus the life history of kind of a short, quick life cycle.
Thank you. And then Jim asks, why do gulls hang out in shopping center parking lots? I think you talked to that a little bit, but
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we leave a lot of food there, and they're very adaptable. They'll fly from high Arctic Canada to come eat our French fries if they can. They're also often areas to sit and loaf. You'll see that up on Park Point, somewhere they won't be disturbed and they have good view of predators, that sort of thing.
Joan is wondering how much hybridization occurs in gulls.
Yeah, I'll say that in the Great Lakes, we're lucky to have not nearly as many hybrids as they do out west. You go do some gulling in like Washington and Oregon, and the majority of the birds are hybrids, and so that really brings some messiness to the equation. When here I mean, I would say the vast majority of birds you're going to see are going to be pure birds. We do get some lesser black-backed herring hybrids and other things, but the vast majority of gulls in the Great Lakes are pure.
Awesome. Thanks, Frank. Anything else for us?
I have a
No, I don't
few
think so.
other questions for Frank, if you're up for them, Frank.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, did you have a spark gull or a favorite gull, and
Ooh,
why?
yeah, that's a great question. I really like Sabin's gulls. I think they're striking. I appreciate that you can find them pretty much in any state in the winter or in the fall when they're moving through, but then they're also off the continental shelf. And if you haven't seen a Sabin's gull in flight, I encourage you to look up a photo. Yeah, it's just a really striking pattern and a very long distance migrant, and I think they're super cool.
Cool. And then you did mention traveling to Duluth for gulls. Is there an international gull destination that folks
Mhm.
that are really deep into the gull subculture always want to go?
Yeah, I think it depends on where you're coming from, but I know I think a lot of birders in the United States are hoping for some of these species that regularly occur in Russia and Asia, and so I think that's a popular destination. Going someplace like Japan in the winter, you can see slaty-backed gulls and Vega gulls and Tamir gulls and all these things that you're hoping to find one day in the U.S. So that would definitely be a fun spot I would like to go someday.
Fabulous. Does anybody else have any other questions? Danny can confirm that Japan in winter has lots of gulls.
Great.
Um, okay, so it looks like there are no other questions, Frank. That was fabulous. Can you, as we're getting Armand ready for his presentation, can you share a little about the research you're doing right now? I think folks will be excited to hear about it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. This is my third season out here. I'm in California doing spotted owl and great gray owl surveys. I'm actually working for a timber company up here, and so we monitor all of our owls on our property and keep an eye on where they are. It's a lot of fun. The owls are nesting right now. We've got many spotted owls on nests. We have a couple of great gray owls on nests, goshawks as well. We also survey the yellow-legged frogs in the area, this endangered species. Yeah, it's great. Spring is here in a way that it might not be in Minnesota, which I can appreciate. But I've been seeing some reports coming out of Minnesota right now, and I think May and June there's nowhere better in the lower 48 to be than Minnesota. So yeah, I'll definitely be keeping an eye on what you guys are seeing here.
Oh, and it looks like there's another question that just popped into the chat.
Mhm.
Oh, Joan. Um, how do you feel about barred owl culling to protect spotted owl? That's a loaded question, Joan.
It is, yeah. I think the science is pretty clear that the two can't really coexist. So I'm gonna leave the ethical decision up to you personally, but um, yeah, they don't do well together, that's for sure.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Frank. That was fabulous. We can't wait to see you at the banding station when you get back to town. And if anybody has any more questions for Frank, throw those in the chat. And then Sammy is going to introduce our next presenter.